Hi, fourth graders. Mrs. Somick here, and today we are going to begin exploring a new genre in Reading Workshop. And I am so excited to share with you a rich, exciting text genre called, as you can probably already tell from my screen, fiction. Now, how many of you like to use your imagination to think of wonderful and exciting new ideas? I know I love using my imagination. So fiction, it's amazing because it allows us to explore faraway lands, new worlds, and unique ideas with our imaginations. Now, writers of fiction use their imaginations to create entertaining stories for their readers. And there are so many different types of fiction, and that's what I want to review with you first before we dive in to a couple of these types of fiction today. All right, so what do we already know about the following types of fiction? Let's take a look. Up here with my Prince Frog, as you have guessed it here, we have fantasy fiction. This usually involves magic, supernatural creatures, maybe superpowers or talking animals. We have science fiction. That usually has to do with where we're going to be set in the future with some major scientific or technological advances. Maybe it's space or aliens or future life on Earth. We have historical fiction. Now, this can be an imaginative story with fictional characters, but many times it can be based on historical events that have actually happened. Ooh, I love a good mystery. Our mysteries are stories of imagination in which the characters have a secret problem or a crime to solve. There's usually a lot of suspense in there. And many of us were very familiar with realistic fiction. And these could be made up stories that are based that could really happen in real life, and the characters are very believable. But like my little Bitmoji down here says, wait, there's still more fiction. Okay, let's take a look. So this is going to take us to the types of fiction that we're going to be looking at a little closer today. Okay, so first off here, we have our traditional fiction, which entails all of these different types. So the thing about traditional literature is that it's all about stories that have been passed down from one generation to the next. So maybe it's a good folk tale, which would be something that would be told orally, okay, from one generation. Many times it involves different cultural groups. Fairy tales. Well, usually they start off with things like once upon a time. Tall tales. Maybe there's something about the story that where they've taken the truth and they've just stretched it a little much to make it a little bit unbelievable. Ooh, a good legend. A lot of times this can be kind of related to facts or historical events that have happened. Fables. Fables are very similar here to folk tales, but they usually involve animals and there's some kind of theme or moral lesson that we're going to learn. Oh, and I know my son's favorite here, myths. They love a good kind of something that a story based on some kind of tradition or explains how the world or humankind came to be. Many times involves gods and goddesses. So let's dive in a little bit more about the characteristics of each one of these. Now, what I want you to do, okay, is that you have in your Google Doc, all right, in your Google Classroom here, you have this table. And what I want you to do is I want you to write down in this document when you're finished with my video, were you already pretty familiar with this type of fiction here? How do you feel about traditional literature? Do you feel like you've known what this was before, or is this pretty unknown to you? So you'll either type in known, or unknown. Next, folk tales. How do you feel about folk tales? Do you feel like you've known what folk tales were before we started this? Or is this still unknown to you? And that's okay because guess what, friends? It's my job to teach you about it, right? What about myths? Are you pretty well known about myths? Do you know your myths well? Or is this still an area that's unknown to you? And then realistic fiction. I have a guess that I think we're pretty familiar with realistic fiction, but just let me know. Is this an area that's known to you or is it unknown? So make sure you write this down here in your Google Doc before we really get into today's lesson here. I want to know how you feel about fiction before we even get into this. All right? Okay, well, let's get started here. So what we're going to do first, okay, because I have some books that we're not going to read the whole thing with most of them. We're just going to kind of take a look at some of the elements in my books, and we're going to figure out what kind of fiction we think it is, and we're going to figure out why. So the first book I have for you is called Jalapeno Bagels, and it's by Natasha Wing. This is a good one, okay? So hold tight as I pull this up here for us to take a look at today. jalapeno bagels. All right. So let's take a look at just the front cover here of jalapeno bagels. What do you notice about it? I can see that the illustrations, do they look believable to me? I have a young boy here. Looks like he's in some kind of storefront, right? He's turning the opening sign on. Oh, and look at all the different bagels and different croissants and things in the window. Well, let's just look on the inside cover here. Now, I'm going to read aloud to you, and I want you to think about what is it that you're hearing here. Let's point out some of the elements that already can tell that this story is going to be about. You ready? Here we go. Pablo can't decide what to take to school for International Day. He wants to pick something from the bakery his parents own, something that represents his heritage. But what? There are the pan dulce and the chango bars his Mexican mother prepares. But the bangles and the challah made by his Jewish father are equally tempting. And then when Pablo begins to help his parents prepare the Sunday morning baking, he comes up with the perfect choice. All right. So here we know we have a young man who's trying to figure out what he's going to bring to International Day. What kind of story or type of fiction do you think this would be? Let's go back to our chart and think about it here. Okay. All right, here we go. So what we're thinking here, I know that this might be a good example of realistic fiction. Why? It seems like to me that it tells the story of Pablo in a way that could actually happen in real life, right? We could have a young boy trying to decide what he would want to bring for his International Day, okay? So right here, what I have, I'm going to pull my little box away and reveal my answer. So what story taught us this? Well, I know that jalapeno bagels taught us that this is realistic fiction, right? And why did it? Because it tells the story of Pablo in a way that could actually happen in real life. So friends, in your Google Doc, what I want you to do is under realistic fiction in your chart, you're going to write down jalapeno bagels. That's an example of realistic fiction. Why? Like I said before, because it tells the story of Pablo in a way that could actually happen. So if you need a pause and maybe jot that down that you can put into your Google Doc, that's fine, or you can fill it in at the end of this lesson. Okay, so we got check realistic fiction chosen already. Let's see what else we have in store. Here comes our next text. Again, we're just going to preview a little bit of it. We have the gods and goddesses of Olympus. I wonder what kind of fiction it is. Maybe you already know. Maybe you can even tell by just the front cover. But let's go ahead. We're going to take a look at the back cover of this. And let me pull it up here. Just the back cover, and let's kind of get a gist of what this book is all about. Long ago, in ancient Greece, people created stories, myths, to explain the mysteries of life. And these myths told of gods and goddesses, fearful monsters, brave heroes, and mysterious beauties. In these pages, you will meet the great immortals, Zeus, the powerful king of the gods, and Hera, his beautiful yet jealous wife. And you're going to meet Athena, who sprung from Zeus's head fully grown, and the lovely Aphrodite, who rose out of the seat on a cushion of foam. You will hear the story of the fierce battle fought to earn them their golden thrones. The awesome Olympians of Greek mythology come to life as Aliki skillfully weaves many of the tales that have fascinated children for generations. Oh, I really want to pick that one up and read it. All right, so let's think about some of the characteristics that we just read about. I heard things like Greek gods and goddesses, right? I even heard this idea that it is part of mythology, and that really kind of gives it away, doesn't it? Okay, so I'm looking at traditional literature, folk tales, or myths. Okay, it does even go through and explain that this book's all about explaining natural events. So we now know that a text for this, the gods and goddesses of Olympus, this is an example of a myth. And why would this be an example of a myth? Well, because just like it said, it has the stories of gods and goddesses that have amazing powers. So now we have two separate examples already on our chart. Make sure, again, you fill this into your Google Doc, okay, that your teacher's going to check out to make sure you've written down these notes. Okay, let's keep going. I've got one final selection pulled for you today. Maybe you've actually already read some of the stories of our spider here. Okay, this here is The Adventures of Spider. Now, the one that we're actually going to read today together is called How Spider Got a Thin Waist. And this has been retold. It's not the original author. It's been told from generation to generation. So it's being retold by Joyce Cooper Arkhurst. All right. So let's follow along here. And I'm going to go ahead and start reading the first 4 pages to us on our spider here. All right. How Spider Got a Thin Waist. Many dry seasons ago, before the oldest man in our village can remember, before the rain and the dry and the rain and the dry that any one of us can talk about to his children, Spider was a very big person. He did not look as he looks today, with his fat head and his fat body and his thin waist in between. Of course, he had 2 eyes and 8 legs, and he lived in a web, but none of him was thin. He was big and round, and his waistline was very fat indeed. Today, he's very different, as you all know, and this is how it came to pass. One day, Spider was walking through the forest. It was early morning, and he noticed an unusually pleasant smell. He wrinkled his nose and sniffed the wind. It was food. Goodness, he had almost forgotten. Today was the festival of the harvest. Every village in the big forest was preparing a feast. The women were cooking yams and kavasa and the chicken with the peanut-flavored sauce. There would be fish and peppers and rice boiling in the great pots over the fires. Spider's heart jumped for joy. His mouth watered, his eyes sparkled, and he smiled brightly. Already he could taste the food on his tongue. Now, of course, Spider had not done any of the work to deserve such a feast, and no one had invited him to come and eat. Spider had not planted yam or potato. He had not planted rice, nor gone to the sea in a long boat to catch fish, for Spider did not like to work at all. All day he played in the sun or slept, and since it is not the custom to refuse food to anyone who comes to one's door, he could eat very well by simply visiting all of his friends, and in fact he ate more than they did. And now Spider was right in the middle of the forest. Not far away, there were 2 villages. Spider stood just in the middle, and the 2 were exactly the same distance away. Today each village would have a great feast. How lucky for me, thought Spider. But then he was puzzled. Since there were 2 dinners, he did not know which one he wanted to go to. That is, he did not know which one would have the most to eat. So Spider sat down a breadfruit tree and thought and thought and thought, and at last he had a great idea. He could go to them both. Of course, Spider was so pleased with his great idea that he did a little dance right there and then. But how could he know when the food was ready? So he sat under the breadfruit tree again and thought and thought and thought, and then he had another idea. He did another little dance just because he was so brilliant. And then he did 2 things. Let's pause for just a second. Now, I can already tell here that we know that The Adventures of Spider, which is beautifully explained, it's an oral tradition of what we call folk tales. Okay? And if you follow along here, it even starts off, did you notice? Many dry seasons ago, before the oldest man in our village can remember. This is actually pretty cool because this is telling us right away that this story we're about to hear happened long ago. And it's been passed down for many generations and many years. Another cool thing about folktales is that the storyteller often talks directly to the audience. Much like when we read today, he is very different, as you all know. These are both clues that let us know that this is a traditional folktale. Now, let's be on the lookout for more examples as I continue to share this with you. Listen to how the author is going to talk to you, the reader, directly. First, he called his eldest son Kuma. He took a long rope and tied one end around his waist, and the other end he gave to his son. Take this rope to the village on the east, he said to Kuma. When the food is ready, give the rope a hard pull, and I will know it's time for me to come and eat. And so Kuma went to the east village and took the end of the rope with him. Then Spider called his youngest son, Kwaku. He took another long rope and tied it around his waist and just below the first one. Kwaku, take this rope to the village on the west, he said, and when the food is all cooked, pull very hard on it, and then I will come and have my fill." So Kwaku went to the West Village, carrying the end of the rope with him. My friends, can you imagine what happened? I don't think so. So I'll tell you. Did you catch that? Did you hear what the author just did? The author's talking directly to you. Hear what he said? My friends, can you imagine what happened? I don't think so. So I'm going to tell you. They're telling it just like a storyteller, right? Well, let's see what happens to Spider. I don't think you're going to guess. The village in the east, the people in the east village and the people in the west village had their dinners at exactly the same time. So of course, Kuma and Kwaku pulled on both of the ropes at the same time. Kuma pulled to the east and Kwaku pulled to the west. The ropes got tighter and tighter. Poor but greedy Spider was caught in the middle. He could go neither east nor west, nor left nor right. Kuma and Kwaku could not understand why their father did not come, and so they pulled harder all the time. And something was happening to Spider. The rope squeezed tighter and tighter on his waist as it got thinner and thinner. Kuma and Kwaku waited until all the food was eaten, and then they came to look for their father. When they found him, he looked very different. His waistline was thinner than a needle. Spider never grew fat again. He stayed the same until today. He has a big head, a big body, and a tiny little waist in between. Okay, so let's go back to our chart as we finish up our chart today here, okay, on our adventures of Spider. So as I've already told you, Spider is an example of a folk story, a folk tale here. We can tell it's been passed down from generation to generation. And as I reveal our story clues here, how do we know? How Spider got a thin waist, we know that's an example because the story begins by telling us right away what we were about to hear happened long ago, and it had been passed down for many years. Again, what I love about folk tales is they're told from a storyteller's point of view. So it's like they're talking to you directly. All right. So today we have just begun to explore all the wonders of our fiction today. Throughout our unit, we're going to read some amazing fiction stories, from realistic fiction to myths to folk tales and more. Now, one more time, friends, I want you to go back to your Google Classroom, and there's a Google form waiting for you, and you need to fill out this chart here. Let us know, are these areas already known to you or are they unknown? And copy down what 3 examples we read today and give us some clues why. Make sure you turn that in and you complete it before marking as done. All right, do you want an extra challenge though? I put in a fun little Google slide assignment, just optional, of course, but if you want an extra little challenge for you, I've got a fun little slides that you can go through and see if you can figure out what kind of fiction is being given as an example, okay? All right, well, I hope you enjoyed reading with me today as we just dive in just a little bit into our fiction unit. We will continue to explore more. All right, friends, until next time.